Now, let me start with that. Now, here's one of the things that was given to me and is in the book Your First Contact, which is a general concept about the history of humanity. And this shows you the movement of it from being an etheric, intelligent civilization through the entire history of Earth, because basically it is the cetaceans who, with spiritual energies from the various hierarchies of spiritual and physical angels in this galaxy and in heaven, that helped us through all of this to become fully conscious beings. And then what we can then say is that we then moved downward after Lemuria was found when the so-called Atlantis experiment, which we'll talk about briefly, but not a lot. It's just how we became limited conscious beings. We basically got a lot of our technology in our DNA, etc., knocked down or sequencing destroyed, but not completely destroyed. Where we all began, all humanity, is in the Lyra constellation, in a place about 26 light years from here, which is Vega, which is simply, in scientific terminology of astronomy, is called Alpha Lyrae, which means the largest and brightest star in Lyra. And this is it. This is Vega. It's a big blue star, and it's a lot bigger than our star, and it also rotates a lot faster. But that does not change the fact that it is very similar to our sun. Now, let's move on. When the Lyran constellation became a place of humanity's star nations being created, they eventually moved. The first one outside of Lyra was Sirius, and eventually, with the Hibernia group about 2 million years ago, moved into Earth. So galactic humans and their allies disagreed with the dinosaurian and reptilians' claims to own the galaxy. This resulted in a galactic war, millions of years of galactic war. Now, there's now peace. And as it says here, humans evolved from an aquatic, ape-like creature that resided on a planet in the Vega system. Humans achieved full consciousness about 6 million years ago, and they reached, as I just said, this particular solar system and our planet and a few others that directly surround us about 2 million years ago. Now, this is our solar system. And the water planets actually that exist in our planet are Earth, Venus, and what was the former world that existed, which we now call Posh, and is now called the asteroid belt. It's the remnants of what wasn't vaporized when the planet was destroyed. And finally, Mars itself. Now, outward. Our extraterrestrial origins. Now, people who have been studying the Genome Project, the Human Genome Project, have discovered that there's a whole bunch of stuff which has basically been called junk DNA around the helical structures that we call DNA. And that human DNA has something in it that is a lot different, and that it has to do with our abilities. This is something that we are learning. When certain people in our planet get what's called proper rare sequencing changes in their genetics, they develop strange and wondrous abilities where they can withstand cold, withstand heat in amazing ways. They also have the ability to be extremely telepathic. They can move things around. They have degrees of being able to move things around, or telekinesis as it's called. They also have the ability to interact with their environment in a very unique way. This is simply called synthesia. I always have trouble saying that. Synthesia. Synthesia simply means that when you hear a sound, you don't just hear a sound, you see a color. And in some rare cases, your tongue picks up a taste. Your nostrils pick up a specific smell. So your entire so-called 5 senses are engaged with this one sound. The same happens with a smell. The smell takes on a color. It takes on a specific taste. You begin to see, if you go to see a symphony, an amazing symphony of colors and sounds and tastes, etc., all mixed together. And this then creates a unique sense. This is what many scientists who are studying synthesia believe is where the next step in our evolution. This is just an example of what is happening to us. We are changing. Now, not only do we have this wonderful little byproduct which can actually be seen and experimented on called synthesia, we have all kinds of people coming up with unique and incredible memory systems, able to produce things above what you would see, like with Rain Man, who was just an autistic being that had a one single ability. What actually happens is this one single ability becomes creative. It's not just memorizing things, it's utilizing them to make theories come together. Or there are painters who are blind who can paint things even though they can't see them because they can see with their skin. So what you have is all these abilities. This lies within the changes happening to our genetic code, our genetic structure. So as Professor Chang said in this article that we're talking about, what we see in our DNA is a program consisting of two versions, a big code and a basic code. Big code is currently inactive or dormant. This is what is going to create the fully conscious human. Basic code is currently our active DNA program. This creates our present limited conscious human framework. Now, people are discovering that this stuff, this junk DNA, might not be so useless after all. We're determining, as a team from IBM discovered, that actually it has a functional role in how our human genome operates. So what we are discovering is there is structure within these particular so-called junk DNA that is actually providing the basis for a more complex structure in how our RNA DNA communicates with us and how it brings in information. And it gives us our abilities. They've also discovered that it's much more complex than anyone at first thought. What we are actually having here is a genetics that is showing us that we are going beyond what we think. There's actually an encoding going on. Now, one of the things that genetics talk about, when these structures, these sequences of RNA DNA, our genetic structures, begin talking to one another, we then begin saying they're encoding one another. In other words, they're changing their sequencing patterns, or they're making sure that the sequencing patterns are similar. So, furthermore, Dr. Tim Hubbard of the Wellcome Sanger Trust Institute, which is one of the finest and major institutes on genetic research in the entire planet, said, we are now seeing the majority of the rest of the genome is active to some extent. In other words, it's not just this helix that's doing it. This junk DNA is encoding, it's processing, and it's speaking to this stuff we call RNA DNA, and it's changing it through this encoding process. The Russians have further shown that RNA DNA is not only responsible for the construction of our body, but also serves as a data storage and communication system. So hidden within this stuff that makes us is something that allows us to have language, allows us to think, allows us to use logic. Human DNA is a biological internet. In other words, not only are these things talking to one another, they're talking to everything else. By that I simply mean all the RNA DNA that's human wherever in this great and incredibly huge universe. This suggests our DNA is not only responsible for the building of our body, but also serves as a data storage and communication system. Human language did not appear coincidentally. It was a mirror of this RNA DNA. Now, we are changing. The first thing in this mutation process, this is the way Crick and Watson put it together, the four ladders, the different forms of proteins, that act as our genetic structure materials, and this helical thing of the strands of RNA DNA that they're talking to. They immediately discovered when they did all of this that there was a third strand. They thought this third strand, like the junk DNA, was not encoding, and that it was a remnant of the former process of evolving from a more primitive creature to us human and beings that we all are today. It is now activating. Since the mid-1980s, people have been born, kids have been born, crystal children, etc., have been born with this active, and it's starting to mutate to anybody around them. Eventually,